You're tired of praying and getting silence in return. You've cried into your pillow, hoping that maybe, just maybe, God would respond through a feeling, a verse, a whisper in your spirit, something. But the heavens stayed quiet. No voice, no confirmation, just more silence. And silence, when you're breaking inside, feels like abandonment. You start to wonder if you're the only one. Maybe you're the only person who prays like this and gets nothing back. You sit in church and hear testimonies of breakthroughs and answered prayers, and you clap, smile, even say, Amen. But your heart feels like a hollow drum, echoing every prayer you've sent into the void. And the worst part? You feel guilty for feeling that way. Because everyone tells you to trust God's timing, or just keep believing. But no one tells you what to do when you're running out of strength to even pretend anymore. You've tried to stay strong. You've quoted the verses. You've fasted. You've waited. But deep down, you wonder if God just moved on. You've asked the questions you were afraid to say out loud. Did I do something wrong? Am I being punished? Did he forget about me? And those questions don't always come in clear sentences. Sometimes they show up in the way your shoulders sink a little lower every day, in the way you scroll past Bible posts because it feels too painful to believe again, in the way you stop talking to others about God because you don't want to hear another empty answer. What you don't realize is that the silence you hate might be the very evidence that something divine is underway. The absence of sound is not the absence of presence. Just because you don't hear God doesn't mean He stopped working. And just because your miracle hasn't come doesn't mean He's not moving pieces in your favor. But when your heart is aching and your prayers feel ignored, it's almost impossible to believe that. But look deeper. Let's go back to the moment when Jesus received news that Lazarus, his beloved friend, was deathly ill. Everyone expected him to drop everything and run to Bethany, but he didn't. He waited 2 whole days. Can you imagine being Mary or Martha, watching your brother die while knowing Jesus could have healed him, but didn't? The grief they carried wasn't just for their loss. It was confusion, betrayal, pain. Why didn't he come? That silence must have felt unbearable. But Jesus wasn't being cruel. He was being intentional. He wasn't late. He was deliberate. Because what he was preparing to do was far greater than what they had prayed for. They asked for healing. He gave them resurrection. They wanted relief. He gave them glory. But to get there, they had to walk through the kind of silence that breaks you. And that's what nobody tells you. Sometimes God doesn't answer because what He's doing is bigger than what you're asking for. He's not ignoring you. He's orchestrating a miracle that your timeline can't hold. His silence is not a sign of absence. It's the sound of sacred preparation. Just like a seed breaks open in darkness, so does purpose. And sometimes, God buries us in silence to resurrect us in power. The problem is, when you're in it, it doesn't feel sacred. It feels like suffocation. But what if the suffocating silence is actually the exact environment your faith needs to breathe again? What if the silence isn't killing you? It's healing you in ways you can't yet see. What if the heaven you think is silent is actually a battlefield where angels are fighting for your restoration, just outside your line of sight? Isaiah 64:4 says, "Since ancient times no one has heard, no ear has perceived, no eye has seen any God besides you, who acts on behalf of those who wait for Him." Acts, not thinks, not hopes, not maybe decides. Acts. That means while you're waiting, He's working. While you're crying, He's crafting. While you're asking why, He's answering in ways you'll only understand when it's complete. You see, when the enemy tries to convince you that silence is proof of God's absence, it's because he knows something you don't. That silence often comes before the storm breaks open. That stillness is sacred. It's where God builds the next move without alerting your adversary. It's a strategy, not a punishment, because if the enemy can't hear what God is about to do, he can't stop it. So maybe you're not forgotten. Maybe you're hidden in a silence so holy, even you weren't meant to understand it yet. Hidden so deeply in the hands of God that even your fears can't reach you. Hidden not because you're abandoned, but because He's building something in you so sacred it can't be interrupted. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the silence is where you stop surviving on signs and start walking by faith again. Maybe it's not about hearing God in the moment, but about learning to trust that He's always moving, even when He's not speaking. Because some of the most powerful miracles in the Bible began in silence. A barren womb, a sleeping sea, a closed tomb. And in every one of those moments, the silence wasn't the end, it was the soil. The question is, can you still believe when nothing around you gives you a reason to? Can you hold on when your only evidence is a God you can't hear, but refuse to stop trusting? Because that's where real faith begins, not in answers, but in the decision to stay when everything in you wants to walk away. And if you're reading this thinking, "This sounds like me," it's because it is. You're not alone in the silence. You're in the exact place where the impossible is being formed. And when it breaks, when it finally comes, you'll understand why God waited. You'll understand why the silence was the safest place for your miracle to grow. You've probably never told anyone, but there's a kind of fear that grows in the silence. It creeps in slowly, first as doubt, then as frustration, and finally as a quiet resignation. That maybe God isn't going to show up this time. That maybe the story you hoped for just isn't yours. And the worst part is, you've seen Him move in other people's lives. You've seen healing, restoration, unexplainable breakthroughs. And while you celebrate them, part of you aches with the silent question, why not me? It's a dangerous space, this holy quiet, because it can either refine your faith or fracture it. And most people will never know the intensity of that internal battle. It doesn't scream, it whispers, it doesn't break things loudly. It wears you down silently. It's not a storm you see, it's erosion you feel. And that's exactly why silence is so powerful, because it's not empty, it's weighty. It's doing something beneath the surface that can't be seen yet. Silence is where God strips away the noise so that what's true can finally be heard. And maybe that's why He's been so quiet with you lately. Because you've heard enough voices telling you what to do, who to be, how to pray, how to fix yourself. But now He wants you to hear Him, not in thunder, not in earthquake, not even in fire, but in a whisper that can only be heard when everything else goes quiet. That whisper isn't always words. Sometimes it's rest you didn't expect. Sometimes it's a moment of clarity in your kitchen while doing the dishes. Sometimes it's the way your heart suddenly stops panicking for one whole minute. You think God speaks in grand moments, but He speaks in breath, in stillness, in those seconds when your soul exhales without knowing why. But let's be honest, stillness doesn't come naturally to you. You've been wired for survival, for action, for keeping it together. Maybe you were the one in your family who held everyone up, the one who never had the luxury of falling apart. And now, in this season of divine silence, you feel like you're being dismantled. You don't know how to be still because stillness feels like surrender, and surrender feels like failure. But in the kingdom of God, surrender is not weakness. It's the gateway to restoration. It's where God finally takes over. Because you've been driving for so long, your hands have scars from gripping the wheel. You've navigated through heartbreak, disappointment, unanswered prayers, and still kept going. But this is where God says, "Give it to me." Not because you're losing, but because you were never meant to carry this battle alone. Ephesians 6:12 reminds us, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and the rulers of darkness in heavenly places." That means what you're feeling right now might not even be about you. It's bigger than that. It's a spiritual war, and the silence you feel might be heaven's shield wrapped around you. Because while you sleep, while you cry, while you whisper things you're too afraid to pray out loud, God is moving armies. God is rerouting what was sent to destroy you. God is building strength into your spirit where the world only sees weakness, and none of it is visible. That's why it feels like nothing is happening. Because real battles are always fought in the unseen. And if you could see the battlefield over your life right now, you'd fall to your knees, not in fear, but in awe. You'd see angels standing between you and what tried to break you. You'd see spiritual assignments being canceled. You'd see that the silence was not a void, but a veil, a covering, a sacred silence to protect what God is preparing to reveal. It's hard to believe, I know, especially when everything in your body is tired, when your eyes are dry from crying, when your prayers feel like echoes. But look at Daniel. He prayed, he fasted, he sought God for 21 days, heard nothing. But what he didn't know was that the answer was sent on the first day. The delay wasn't denial, it was warfare, angelic interference, heavenly opposition. But it was working, even when it looked like silence. Now take a breath. Let that sink in. What if the silence in your life isn't punishment, but positioning? What if you're not abandoned, but appointed? What if this delay is divine? What if, just like Daniel, your answer was dispatched on the first day, but it's taking time to break through? That kind of revelation doesn't always come with thunder. It comes in moments like this, where you feel your spirit settle, even if your circumstances haven't changed. It's peace that doesn't make sense, strength that doesn't feel earned, a calm in your chest that tells you, God is still with me, even in this. You don't need all the answers right now. You just need to remember this truth. Heaven's silence is not a sign of absence. It's a sign of strategy. And the God who seemed late in Lazarus' story showed up right on time for a miracle that nobody could deny. You may be in that waiting room right now, but don't walk out. Don't give up. Don't assume silence means you've been forgotten. Because sometimes silence is where the sacred is born. Sometimes the silence is the pause before resurrection. It's strange how silence can echo louder than words. You walk into your room, close the door, and it's there. Not noise, not chaos, just stillness. And yet, it feels heavy, like something is sitting in the air, waiting. You try to distract yourself. Music, phone, work. But the silence finds you again, not to torment, but to draw you in. Because there's something sacred about this season that can only be experienced when everything else fades away. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. There's a moment in John 11 that many people overlook. It's not the resurrection of Lazarus. It's not the weeping of Mary and Martha. It's the delay. Jesus didn't rush. He didn't run. In fact, he waited 2 whole days after hearing the news that his friend was dying. 2 days of silence, 2 days of absence, 2 days of perceived neglect. What kind of love waits while someone suffers? It's the kind of love that sees a bigger picture. Because here's the truth. If Jesus had come earlier, Lazarus would have only been healed. But because he waited, Lazarus was resurrected. And some of you watching right now, you've been praying for healing, but God is planning a resurrection. And resurrection always takes longer. It requires a death, a burial, a silence that feels permanent. That's why you feel like God isn't listening. Because your timeline is still tied to comfort, not transformation. And God, in His mercy, is letting certain things die, not to punish you, but to prepare you. Because what He's bringing to life on the other side of this silence will be bigger than what you were praying for. You were asking for survival. He's preparing revival. And it doesn't always look spiritual. Sometimes it looks like isolation, like friendships falling apart, like job losses, like routines breaking, like prayers that go unanswered, and nights where you cry until your chest aches. But in all of that, something is being buried, and it's not you. It's the version of you that was never meant to last. Because the wilderness is not just a place of testing, it's a place of transformation. That's why in Hosea 2:14, God says, I will allure her, I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. He doesn't drag you there, He allures you, draws you, and then whispers to your heart. But it doesn't feel like a whisper at first. It feels like abandonment, like rejection, like your prayers are hitting a ceiling. But the silence isn't rejection, it's reverence. It's God pulling you away from everything familiar to speak something unforgettable. Ask anyone who's ever had their faith rebuilt from the ground up, and they'll tell you. The silence was where it started. Not the miracle, not the platform, not the answered prayer, the silence. Because silence doesn't just reveal God, it reveals you. It shows you what you've been depending on, what you've been numbing, what you've been avoiding. It's in the silence that the masks come off, the roles fall apart, and all that's left is the real you. And that's exactly who God came for. Not the version of you that performs, but the version that's weeping alone at night, asking if he still sees you, if he still hears, if you're still his. And here's the miracle. Even when you feel like you've let go of him, he hasn't let go of you. His silence isn't distance. It's closeness without noise. It's presence without performance. It's the kind of nearness that doesn't need words to prove itself. There's a reason the disciples didn't recognize Jesus on the road to Emmaus until he broke bread. He walked with them in silence, listened, let them process, let them grieve, and only at the moment of intimacy, of shared presence, did they realize who had been with them all along. And that's what he's doing with you, walking silently beside you, letting your heart speak freely, waiting for the moment when your spirit finally notices he never left. Because the silence isn't a punishment, it's a pause, and pauses are sacred. They're where meaning lives. They're where God rewrites your name. You keep wondering if something's wrong with you because the silence hasn't gone away. You're still waking up with that weight in your chest, still showing up for life like everything's fine, while inside it feels like you're falling apart in slow motion. But what if I told you that this silence isn't a delay in your destiny, but part of its design? What if God hides on purpose? Not because he's cruel, but because he wants to change the way you seek. We don't talk about this enough. Sometimes God withdraws the feeling of his presence to awaken a deeper hunger in us. Not because he's absent, but because he wants to teach us how to find him in the absence of emotion. Because real faith doesn't live on feelings, it lives on trust. It's easy to believe when everything's flowing and the answers are clear. But what about when all you get is a closed door, a cold room, and a heart full of questions? That's where mature faith is born, not in blessings, but in the silence between them. Let's go back to the story of Lazarus, because there's a detail people miss. When Jesus finally arrives, Martha runs to meet him. She's confused, angry, devastated, and yet, in the middle of her grief, she says, "But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask, even now, even after the silence, even after the death." This is what God is looking for, not just praise when things go right, but faith that survives disappointment. Because, let's be honest, some of you are sitting in the even now. You've buried dreams, lost people, watched time steal what you thought was promised, and it hurts. You don't want a sermon. You want answers. You want to know, why didn't he come sooner? And here's the hardest truth. He did. You just couldn't see it. Because sometimes, God's presence doesn't show up in the way we expect. It shows up in the strength we didn't know we had, in the grace to keep breathing, in the fact that somehow you're still standing, even though everything around you fell apart. You are the proof he didn't leave. You are the miracle. But you don't feel like a miracle, do you? You feel like a failure trying to look functional. You smile in public, cry in the shower, pray at night, and wonder if any of it matters. But I promise you, it does. Because there are no wasted tears in the kingdom of God. Psalm 56:8 says he collects every single one in a bottle. Not one is forgotten. Not one is ignored. Your pain has been documented in heaven. Think about that for a second. The God of the universe has a record of your tears, not your good deeds, not your church attendance. Your tears, because that's where the real you lives, in what you don't show to anyone. And that's the version of you he wants most. Not the perfect one, not the one with answers, the honest one, the one who says, "God, I don't understand you, but I still want you." That's where intimacy begins, and in this silence, that's what's being built. Not distance, but depth. Because emotional noise is a distraction. It keeps you running to things that feel safe but aren't sacred. People, performances, platforms. But silence, it strips that away. Forces you to confront what's actually there. And what's always been there. Him, the one who whispers in the dark, not to scare you, but to steady you. The one who doesn't shout over your pain, but joins you in it, not as a fixer, but as a father. Not rushing to remove your struggle, but sitting with you inside it until you realize the silence is full of his presence. And sometimes, the quietest moments carry the loudest miracles. Because when Jesus stood before Lazarus' tomb, he didn't yell in panic. He commanded with authority, and that authority didn't come from the volume of his voice, but from the clarity of his connection with the Father. That's what the silence produces. Not emptiness, but alignment. So if you're in a season of silence, don't mistake it for abandonment. This is sacred space, and sacred things don't shout, they whisper. It's strange how the loudest cries are often silent, how the people who look the strongest are usually the ones fighting invisible wars, and how the ones who feel the most abandoned by God are often the ones he's closest to, because he trusts them with the weight of the silence. You see, when God is silent, he's not punishing you, he's preparing you to walk by faith and not by sight, preparing you to hold blessings with clean hands and a steady heart, preparing you to become someone who doesn't crumble in the absence of affirmation, because real strength is forged in secret. Think of a seed buried in the soil. It looks like nothing is happening. In fact, from above, it looks like death. But underground, there's a war, pressure, darkness, growth. And then one day, without warning, the soil breaks open and something alive rises from a place that looked forgotten. You are that seed. Your silence is not stagnation. It's germination. It's God growing something in you that can't be rushed. Something that will rise in power after the silence has finished its work. But here's what most people miss. The greatest test isn't waiting in the silence. It's trusting that you're still seen inside it. Remember Hagar in the desert, a woman thrown away by people running from a life that broke her. And there, in the middle of nowhere, under the heat and isolation, God speaks. Not in thunder, not in visions, in a whisper. And Hagar names him El Roi, the God who sees me. Not the God who fixes it. Not the God who answers fast. The God who sees. What if that's enough? What if, in this moment of silence, that's the whole point? To know that even when everything else fades, you are still seen. Because it's easy to feel visible when things are going well. But real identity is discovered when the lights go out. When the applause stops, when your name isn't being mentioned, and your prayers seem to float into empty space, that's when you find out who you really are, and who he really is. Not a vending machine, not a distant judge, but a God who walks beside you in shadows, shaping you through what he doesn't say as much as through what he does. A God who trusts you with silence because he's building something that can't be built in noise. You might not feel strong right now. That's okay. Strength isn't a feeling, it's a decision. The decision to show up, to keep breathing, to keep praying, even if the only words you can whisper are, "Help me." And maybe that's the most powerful prayer of all. Because Scripture tells us the Spirit intercedes for us with groanings too deep for word. In other words, your silence isn't silent in heaven. It's a language only God understands. A sacred exchange between your spirit and his. That means you've never been ignored, never been forgotten, not for a second. Isaiah 49 says, "Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has borne? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hand." Engraved, not written in ink, not scribbled in pencil. Engraved, which means your name is permanently etched into the one who created you. So even when your prayers feel like they disappear into the ceiling, even when you question your worth, Even when your faith feels smaller than a whisper, your name is still held, still honored, still remembered. You don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to stay. Stay in the silence. Stay in the surrender. Stay in the sacred tension between what you know and what you feel. Because this is where transformation happens. Not in the noise, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet corners of your life where no one is watching, but God is working. Maybe this isn't punishment. Maybe this is preparation for something you wouldn't have believed even if He told you. Maybe this silence is the womb of your next miracle. And maybe the reason heaven feels so quiet right now is because your answer is already on its way. So don't stop now, not when you're this close.